So the establishment might be unwittingly setting a trap for themselves, thinking Bernie's not gonna run, and we're gonna steamroll any other progressive that doesn't have enough name recognition. I understand the trick. So, they talk about three-dimensional chess and never play it. This actually is three-dimensional chess, and it is being played out 3 years ahead of time.
The other day, my friend Justin Little, or as he was known in the before times, Vernaculus, had a good Twitter thread about populism that I believe is worth repeating. Justin asked, "Can populists please explain to me how the omnipresent, future-predicting, and all-powerful puppeteering neoliberal deep state and corporate press couldn't manufacture enough consent and rig enough to stop Trump from getting elected in 2016. Trump's election in 2016 and Biden's election in 2020 disproves both modern populist tenets. 1. The common people are easily manipulated by the neoliberal establishment. 2. Populism, necessarily either in its right or left-wing formulation, represents the will of the people. All of this conspiracy theorizing regarding the rigging of Biden's victory in the primary and general election is a desperate cry to avoid Occam and his infamous razor, which tells us two very distinct things. What do you think those two things might be? My opinion on this is as follows. 1. The neoliberal establishment that we all hated when we were teenagers isn't actually as powerful as we once thought. 2. The American people saw what populism had to offer and hated it. Now, there's a lot there, and I don't want this video to be too long. So I'm just going to focus on Justin's first takeaway, that the neoliberal establishment isn't as powerful as people think it is. I couldn't agree more. I would add to that a related point. The people who comprise the establishment, or whatever you want to call it, aren't nearly as competent as people think either. The folks behind the scenes supposedly running everything aren't nearly as sophisticated as populists would have you believe. From what I've seen, the people in charge are pretty mediocre, if anything. Obviously, the online commentariat, which leans populist, sees things much differently. The populist left largely believes that Donald Trump was co-opted and controlled by the establishment, and that actually, if anything, he was just another pawn in their game.
This Trump administration is a giant distraction, right?
Fuck them Mexicans, man, they're a piece of shit, I'm Trump, and then everyone's like, oh my god, Trump's bad, Trump's bad. And then a few people are like, no, Trump's good, Trump's good. Oh, how can you say Trump's good when we say Trump's bad? Well, we say he's good. Well, we say he's bad. Well, fuck you. Well, fuck you. We're gonna impeach Trump. Well, if you impeach Trump, we're gonna do the Civil War.
And the people who actually control everything, they just kind of sit around and go.
He's distracting the public while they do all the nefarious things they do. These people honestly think that a man who quite obviously can't control himself was the puppet in some devious scheme. I, for one, find that hard to believe. Right-wing populists believe that Donald Trump was so brilliant and such a master of strategy that he was able to successfully beat the establishment in 2016.
Now, I criticized that, as did many others, and I failed to realize what Trump's true play here was. He wants the far left front and center. Think about the outcome of Trump's plan now. Not only is the far left front and center, but the Democrats are still fighting. And they look ridiculous, bickering over whether or not to denounce Trump's tweets, instead of actually doing something for the American people. Trump played, I said the other day, he played the media like a fiddle. He played them for fools, but it is even beyond what I could have imagined. I'm shocked to see this story. They take the bait every single time. They take his bait, and it works.
However, because he was draining the swamp, whatever that means, the establishment opposed him at every turn, which is why they robbed him of his victory in 2020. How it was that the master of second-level elevated 3D chess wasn't able to outmaneuver the establishment after 4 years of non-stop unambiguous victories, I don't know. But that's neither here nor there. This isn't just true of governing, of course. It's true of elections as well. One of the themes I want to hammer home in this series about how Bernie Sanders was never actually robbed of the nomination in 2016 or 2020 is precisely this. The establishment is not nearly as powerful nor sophisticated as some people would have you believe. This is not just true in terms of cognition or competence, but legally and institutionally as well. Rather than being examples of just how much political parties rig elections, 2016 and 2020 are excellent examples of just how weak they are. In 2016, the GOP couldn't keep Donald Trump, a man who had no meaningful connection to their party, and had donated to Democrats and almost certainly voted for them in the past, from becoming their nominee. On the other side, the Democrats couldn't get Bernie Sanders, a guy who was never a member of their party, to drop out of their nomination process until the end. Even then it was a struggle. Bernie actually wanted to take the fight to the convention in 2016, but ultimately decided against it. Yet, if you ask your average internet pundit, you'd think that our parties have never been more powerful, and that they can decide who wins no matter what. Even with open and transparent elections, the establishment can still brainwash people into voting exactly how they want. The funny thing is, in the past, our political parties didn't even need to bother with primary elections. Elaine Kamarck, a political scholar and a Brookings Institute fellow, who has written extensively on the history and evolution of the primary process, reminds us of what the Republican Party did in the past when another extraordinarily wealthy man who had previous ties to the Democratic Party sought their nomination.
Little interesting story. Back in the 1920s, guess who wanted to run for the Republican nomination? A guy named Henry Ford.
Yeah.
Extremely popular in the country. People were buying cars. He'd done this. The Republican Party said, no, you manufacture cars. You're a great guy. You're a rich guy. You've done a great thing, but we don't see you, as the standard bearer of the Republican Party. They just said no to him.
In 1968, the Democratic Party just gave the nomination to Hubert Humphrey at the convention, despite the fact that he hadn't run in any primaries and that Eugene McCarthy had far more support going into the convention. In his book Playing with Fire, Lawrence O'Donnell recalls the violent tactics Chicago Mayor Richard Daley resorted to in order to keep McCarthy's delegates off the convention floor.
The convention had begun the nominating process at about 6 p.m. The floor was filled with Humphrey supporters. Hundreds of McCarthy supporters were trapped in the tear gas-drenched McCarthy storefront office downtown. Mayor Daley's police and security guards inside the hall were mirroring the increased police aggressiveness outside the hall. A thuggish Daley ward enforcer was seated in the press gallery. Daley's men stopped New York McCarthy delegate Alex Rosenberg for not having credentials. They were trying to tear them off my neck so they could arrest me for not having credentials, said Rosenberg. Paul O'Dwyer jumped into the ruckus to help his fellow New York delegate. O'Dwyer was a pacifist candidate for Senate whose older brother was a former mayor of New York City. CBS reporter Mike Wallace knew O'Dwyer. Wallace and his camera crew approached, and with his first question, Wallace took a punch in the jaw.
That was a rigged primary. Something like this is very unlikely to happen today because the nominees are almost always known before the convention because the delegates are effectively selected by the voters through the primaries and caucuses. This was not the case then. Now, I will grant that most challenges against establishment politicians are not successful. We just recently saw Shontel Brown beat Nina Turner in a special congressional election. Turner was the early favorite in a crowded primary field until Democratic Party power brokers and big money aligned behind Brown. A number of populists claimed that this was inevitable.
She lost because she chose to run as a fucking Democrat. That's the same reason Bernie lost. There's no way that somebody like Nina Turner is going to sneak their way into the halls of power through the DNC. People are tired of voting for Democratic candidates that talk the big game and then see them be beat out by the corporate candidate. And the DNC arranges that outcome, no matter what, every time.
This outcome was not preordained, though. The establishment is not undefeated. AOC, Cori Bush, and Jamal Bowman all beat important Democratic politicians in their primaries and are now in Congress. India Walton recently won the Democratic nomination for the mayor of Buffalo, beating out four-term incumbent Byron Brown. This will actually be a great test to see how powerful the establishment is in New York politics, as Byron Brown will likely challenge her again in the general through a write-in campaign. Also, it looks as though the Buffalo City Council may try and demote the position of mayor to a less powerful city manager type position. Again, I see these as tricks the establishment has to resort to because they've been neutered. Not so long ago, big city politicians wouldn't have had to deal with a primary challenge, let alone deal with the fallout of losing to one. Usually, the response from populists is to simply make the conspiracy more grand, to the point where it's frankly unfalsifiable. A lot of left-wing populists of the Jimmy Dore persuasion would likely say that the congressmen I listed earlier were co-opted by the establishment, so that this actually goes to show just how powerful the establishment is anyways. These victories were just fig leaves they threw to the public to get them to think that their votes really mattered.
It's a DNC politician. I'm telling you, people are starting to catch on that what the DNC does is dangle these progressives in our face, and then when they do get into the House or the Senate, they just kind of join the chorus of voices or get drowned out. They know how to give us just a little smidgen of hope that something might get done, and people are onto it now. Nobody cares about this anymore.
There's nothing that these incredible theories about evil elites controlling everything in politics from smoke-filled rooms can't explain. Which, of course, means that these theories don't really explain anything at all. There's really no point in trying to persuade these people that they're wrong, either. And of course, that's not my goal. None of this is to say that party insiders don't try to skew results in certain ways, or put their fingers on the scale. It's just that they usually have to do it in a roundabout way, or be cloak and dagger about it. And they're not very good at it. There's actually a great example of this from the 2020 Democratic primary. Way back in 2018, when the DNC was writing the rules for the 2020 primary, one DNC operative encouraged the California state legislature to move their state's primary up to Super Tuesday. Ever since the parties have moved to the primary system, California has traditionally been late in the game. It was on the last day of primary voting in 2016, and while it was technically New Jersey that put Clinton over the top in the delegate count, California was the big win that really sealed the deal for Hillary. So what did Cenk Uygur have to say about California moving up? Well, it was all part of a plan to rig the primary in favor of California's junior senator, Kamala Harris. The following video is titled, "Democrats Already Rigging Next Primary."
So, they want to move up the California primary. Now, why do they want to do that? That seems innocuous. Let me read you the quote from Politico here. If adopted by the legislature this week, as is widely expected, and signed into law by Governor Jerry Brown, the early primary would allocate California's massive haul of delegates just after the nation's first contests in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina. Now look, I live in California. I'd like California to have a bigger voice. That sounds pretty good, okay? So what's the issue here? Just think about it for a second. Who's from California? Oh, right, the person that all the Hillary Clinton donors and staffers are flocking to, Kamala Harris. So this is not an accident. This is not, oh, golly gee, oh, I don't know anything about this. No, it's Don Fowler going, let's move up the California primary. And by the way, who else is in California? The power brokers that would help decide this election. Dianne Feinstein, totally against single payers, totally against progress, totally against change. No, maybe later. Jesus, Senator Feinstein, what are you, 84? When is later? Nancy Pelosi, not single payer, nope, not in favor of it. Nope, we're gonna do gradualism, we're gonna do the establishment. I'm really good at raising money. And so they will help decide our nominee. Great, can't wait. If you're gonna do the Bernie Sanders strategy and you're not Bernie Sanders and you don't have the name recognition, you need time to build up your campaign. They saw that unfold in 2016. They saw that he got stronger and stronger as he went along. His fundraising got bigger and bigger as it went along. If you put the giant California primary in the beginning of that process instead of at the end of that process, good night, Irene. You're never gonna be able to raise enough money to run ads in California. The state's too big, the markets are too big. Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego. This is not a coincidence. You put the California primary that early and you're rigging it for the establishment. So it's not like the Clinton ally doesn't know what he's pushing for here. He does know, and he's almost joyous about it. Like, you're never gonna catch on to this. And why would California not wanna move up their primary and have more say? It's an easy win, and then once we get to the primaries, we're gonna go, oh, did a progressive candidate not have enough time to win all those ballots in California? Golly gee. Man, they got 1,000 tricks up their sleeves. And it's never about getting enough votes or convincing enough people that they have the right policies. It's just about how do we move the levers of power to get our guys in the office, right or wrong.
Of course, Cenk and many other progressives had complained previously about how Iowa and New Hampshire, two states that were not representative of the country as a whole, were so early in the process. Now that the Democratic Party was moving the largest, most diverse state in the union up in the calendar, you'd think that Cenk would be happy. But of course he wasn't. It's also worth noting that staggering the states as they do with primaries and caucuses is undemocratic in a way that helps lesser-known insurgent candidates at the expense of better-known and better-funded candidates. Iowa and New Hampshire are both small states, both in terms of geography and in population, and they're inexpensive, which allows lesser-known candidates to compete on a more equal footing against larger, better-funded campaigns. The votes of the people in these states are far more likely to determine who the nominee is than are the votes of people in later states. Bernie Sanders benefited greatly from this in 2016, and to his credit, Cenk acknowledged this in the clip we just saw. My question is, why isn't that rigging, even though it's undemocratic and disproportionately helps one type of candidate over another? If the reverse was true, it's hard to imagine these people not using the R word. The most democratic way to structure the process would be a one-day 50-state primary. Of course, that would benefit the well-known and well-funded candidates like Hillary Clinton, because their lesser-known competitors likely wouldn't have the resources to compete over the entire nation at once. By moving California up, millions of more people had more say in who the nominee was, making the whole process more democratic. To his credit, Cenk also acknowledges that this move could potentially help Bernie Sanders, but rejected it all the same because he said it was unfair. I believe that this is the exception that proves the rule, though. Most Sanders supporters most of the time only view the process as legitimate and fair as long as their guy wins. Also, that's fine if Cenk wants to adhere to his standard of fairness, but if he insists on doing so, he cannot claim the mantle of democracy. But on the narrow issue of why this primary was moved up, Cenk was actually right. The point of this move was to help Kamala Harris. I guess even a blind buffalo finds some fresh grass once in a while. I actually found this out when I read the 2020 campaign biography, Battled for the Soul, Inside the Democrats' Campaign to Defeat Donald Trump, by Edward Isaac Dovere. Dovere wrote that Juan Rodriguez, Kamala Harris's campaign manager for her 2016 Senate run, and the man who would manage her 2020 presidential campaign, was the one who petitioned the California state legislature to move the primary up to Super Tuesday.
Rodriguez set off on a separate track, but with the same goal in mind, working the California state legislature, and Secretary of State Alex Padilla, who just happened to be a new client of the consulting firm where he and Clegg and longtime Harris advisor A. Smith were partners, he officially made a high-minded argument for moving up the California primary from June, at the end of the calendar, to Super Tuesday in March, the earliest it could be held. The state had 12% of the population and the most representative demography of America. As such, it should be more than a coda to the nomination fight. This was a worse disguise than Clark Kent's glasses. From inception, the plan, which Harris's main consultant Smith worked out, had been to follow the Obama model of slingshotting into South Carolina with a strong showing in Iowa. Black voters, they knew, tended to respond to black candidates only when they saw white voters responding first. Then Harris would weave through a crowded field by picking up a few southern states on Super Tuesday, capped off by a favorite daughter win that night in California. She would be unstoppable.
So, how did that all work out? Well, not so great. Kamala Harris proved to be an incredibly uninspiring candidate, who I can't even say performed dismally in Iowa, because she dropped out well before that. She didn't use that to slingshot herself a win in South Carolina, then move on to catch the big fish of California on Super Tuesday. No, she ended the whole thing unceremoniously in December of 2019. After she was out of money and out of support. Turns out her strategy of campaigning on getting Twitter to ban Donald Trump didn't work out so well. California was still voting on Super Tuesday, though. Who did that benefit the most? It actually ended up helping Bernie Sanders, the man who the DNC supposedly was trying to work against. It was Bernie's most significant win of the entire nomination process, and was only one of 4 states he won that night. Of course, after Bernie had won California, all of the talk about it being rigged just evaporated. Bernie was victorious, therefore everything in California was fair, legitimate, and above board. The online left didn't have to look for their little reason why the election didn't count, because they got the result they wanted. Sanders remained a viable candidate way longer than he otherwise would have been. So, in other words, a plan concocted to help the candidacy of Kamala Harris actually backfired by giving Bernie Sanders more juice than he otherwise would have had, and led to a longer, more protracted primary fight than there otherwise would have been had they left California till the end. Now, you could argue that it all worked out for Harris anyways, because she got the VP slot and is the heir apparent. It's also true that as vice president, she has historically low approval ratings. If she is the Democratic nominee at some point, she will almost certainly lose to a Republican. If the DNC was really that smart, why would they have handpicked a politician that is virtually unelectable? Because fairly or unfairly, people don't like her. It's almost as if they don't know what they're doing. I also want to point out that moving up the California primary isn't something that the DNC or the establishment did. Unlike the 2016 primary, where Hillary Clinton got virtually all of the institutional backing of the Democratic Party, there was no comparable candidates in 2020. If you remember, the 2020 Democratic primary field was historically large. While most of the candidates crashed and burned, a lot of them looked like serious contenders in the beginning and were backed by party members, donors, and fellow politicians. Hillary Clinton even contemplated jumping in the race for herself, as did John Kerry. Barack Obama, the most important person in the Democratic Party, initially contemplated going all in for Beto O'Rourke. It's a good thing for him that he didn't, because Beto was among the candidates to faceplant. Obama ended up softly supporting Elizabeth Warren, of all people, behind the scenes. And that certainly didn't work out. I bring this all up because if you read the details of the primary in any number of the books that have been written about it at this point, you realize that the Democratic Party was disorganized and institutionally in the wilderness. There was no grand scheme. I'll close with a final point on competence. Recently, President Biden has withdrawn American troops from Afghanistan. As I write this video, there are still Americans stranded in that country, and more than a dozen Marines have died. The Taliban took back the country in a matter of days, and now has a bunch of new shiny equipment that it was meant for the Taliban National Army. Those theocratic despots are remaking the country in their image once again. In case you forgot, the resurgent and rearmed Taliban have been operating in Pakistan the whole time, trying to take over parts of that country as well. Pakistan, in case you've also forgotten, is a relatively unstable country with a nuclear arsenal. Biden is getting torched by the press, and his approval numbers are crashing, and in my opinion, he deserves it. To say that the withdrawal has been botched is to say the least of it. Do these people, the folks who screwed this situation up 6 ways from Sunday, really seem like brilliant masters of the universe? I look at them and I see people who have no idea what they're doing. This idea that they're rigging elections and secretly controlling the government in ways that only internet pundits are aware of or willing to speak about is laughable.